Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you for another week. Summer's almost here. Kids are getting out of school. Hopefully you got some fun plans over the summer. But we're still here. Excuse me. We're still here to do the same thing we always do, and that's take over the world. Now, little Pinky in the Brain reference for you. Maybe you're too young for that. I don't know. I'm definitely not. I'm old. I'm getting older by the minute. I feel it. It's life. That's the way it goes. But we're all good. It's a good day. It's a sunny day. It's beautiful out there. We're just looking to have some fun. All right. Well, we're going to start this podcast today. We're going to get into the action. We're going to look at a little bit of the Big 12 regular season win total odds. So this is a sports book out there looking at these. We got some of that action going on. And then we're going to begin our Utah schedule series where we're going to break down the schedule for Utah and look at the first two games of the season. We'll do two teams each week and break that down. So we'll get into that. But first, let me tell you about our partners at Canyon View Credit Union. Feeling confident about your finances changes everything. And that's where Canyon View Credit Union comes in. They focus on helping you build something strong over time at your pace and in a way that fits your life. With Canyon View Credit Union, it's not about one-size-fits-all solutions. It's about steady progress, real guidance, and having someone in your corner who's there for the long run. Through every step, every goal, every new chapter, Canyon View Credit Union is right there with you. And honestly, that kind of support just feels different. Learn more about how Canyon View Credit Union can help you build upon your momentum at canyonviewcu.com. Canyon View Credit Union, shaping your financial journey. All right, let's jump into this. Let's get into the action. Let me pull this up on the screen. What is going on with my screens? We are not doing well today. There we go. If you're watching on YouTube, I'm a mess. I apologize for that. I'm wearing glasses today. Don't usually do that. Got an infection in my eyes, so I can't really wear my contacts. And so we're all just all over the place. It's a mess. Not really loving the situation, but here we are. We're back. We're doing this. There's no days off. It may be the off season, but we're doing this. We're just going to keep going. All right. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see the odds already on the screen, but these are courtesy of Bovada. A couple weeks ago, I shared with you the Bovada odds, the betting lines. This week, I'm showing you the Big 12 regular season win total. So this is what Bovada is expecting teams to win. So you can bet on this, right? If you're a betting type, you can go on there and look at see the team that you follow. Obviously, majority of people here, I would assume, are Utah fans. So you're looking at that line. And this is the regular season win total, right? So 12 games. This is how many is expected for members of the Big 12 to win. And it's pretty similar to last year in a lot of respects, especially at the top. But we're going to jump into this. So first off, one note here is that Texas Tech is off the board right now. There is no betting on Texas Tech simply because of the Brendan Sorsby situation. Anybody that's been following that understands what's going on. Brendan Sorsby is being investigated for gambling. It's a pretty simple investigation. They're admitting that he gambled. He checked into a rehab facility. So that aspect of it is not really up for debate. The best part of this is yesterday, in a lawsuit against the NCAA, Brendan Sorsby basically is using the argument that he used the betting opportunities while at Indiana to grow closer to his team. It's a great spin. I love it. It's phenomenal spin. So he's using it to get closer to his team. Indiana wasn't good back then, and so he didn't feel like it was worth it to, or that it wasn't going to impact anything. And so there's this whole suit, right? This will be challenged in court. Everything will be up in debate on whether he can gain eligibility. Right now, he is ruled ineligible from Texas Tech. And so there's debate on what's going to happen. And obviously, Texas Tech is more than a quarterback, but the quarterback, especially of his caliber, or at least what his projected caliber is supposed to be for Texas Tech, that changes a lot of the odds for this team. Now, if you remember from a previous episode, we went through the Texas Tech schedule when this was all announced. I think this is 2 weeks ago that I did this episode. it's a softer schedule, right? Like, you don't have to face BYU or Utah. You've got teams that are more on the downswing than upswing, but, anything is possible in this league, so things could change. But for the most part, it's a manageable schedule. The question comes, who is going to be your starting quarterback, especially if Brendan Sorsby isn't there? So that's really why Vegas isn't putting, or these odds makers is not putting a line here, because there's just so many unknowns, and there's a real probability that Vegas loses a lot of money, or Bovada, or any of these other services out there, that they lose money if they put a line out there. So they took it off the board. You're not able to bet on Texas Tech right now or see their betting line. My assumption, based on what would have happened, it would have been at least a 9.5 had Brendan Sorsby been there. I think the schedule with their team, everything kind of, it's going to be a high number. I don't think they would be at this 8.5 number that is the top of the Big 12 right now, but 9.5, 10.5 even, probably would have been the number. So really curious to see what happens with Texas Tech. If this updates or things get sorted out, we'll provide that update. It's not, huge. It's not a big reason to be able to following, but it's something of merit anyway. So with that said, at the top of the Big 12, considering Texas Tech right now is off the board, we're not even going to consider them anywhere in there. Obviously, they're going to still be at the top of the conference. We get that. Depending on who the quarterback is, that's going to change a lot of different things. But at the top of the board is going to be Texas Tech. So we can just assume that. But at the same time, they're off the board. Okay. So with that being said, you have a very interesting top of this board. And that top of the board is BYU and Utah, both tied with 8.5 wins. And honestly, I see that as being really realistic for both of these programs. 9 wins is realistic for both of these programs, right? They were at the top of the conference last year. Utah has more of a rebuild than BYU does, especially with a brand new head coach. We've gone over this many times, so it's not anything new. But both of these programs are stocked with talent. They've got, a pedigree of winning. Their schedules are manageable to be able to get there. And so this is a very good opportunity for Utah. Could Utah or BYU get to 8 wins and fall short of that mark? 100%, right? There's questions on both teams, more so on Utah, simply because of what's going on. But really good line for both of these teams, okay? These two are the top of the league at this as it stands. Now, there's other teams, as we've talked about. I did my rating of the Big 12, I think it was 2 weeks ago as well, where, I put them into tiers. Texas Tech, BYU, and Utah were the ones that I had in the top tier. And there's some debate on if that should be the case. I get it. But there's other teams here that very much so could be in that conversation. And the next tier here, according to these betting odds, is Arizona, Houston, and Kansas State at 7.5 wins, which 100% is fair as well for them. Like, most of these are all fair, right? Like, Vegas is really smart at doing these odds. And so there's good rationale behind here. You can find value here, but at the same time, most of these are pretty good odds. So those 6 teams are going to most likely be in contention for the Big 12 title. And that's not to say that they're the only 6 teams, but these are the ones with the highest probability, according to these betting odds, that are to be able to get to the Big 12 title game. And if you look back on what we did, sorry, I don't have that graphic right here. I should have saved that one in here. But if you look back on that, those were the similar odds for most of these teams, right? Those 6 teams are going to be the ones that are considered the favorites to move forward. So there's that. And then beyond that, you've got a lot of teams really jumbled. The difference here is from BYU and Utah at the top. We'll lump Texas Tech in there. Those teams at the top to, let's see, 15. There's not that many games, right? After that, these games, there's a lot of similarities and closeness in these teams in the Big 12. And that's kind of been the hallmark of the Big 12 over the last few years, is a lot of close teams vying for this title. And that's why Texas Tech kind of establishing itself as this generational type run, many thought was a good opportunity for the Big 12, because you have this premier team. BYU and Utah are right there as well. BYU obviously in the Big 12 title game last year, really close to being able to be undefeated, except for that loss to Texas Tech, and then obviously in the championship game again. But you've got these teams that are starting to separate, but at the same time, there's still a lot of in between, right? BYU and Utah are at the top right now, but they're very much more similar to a lot of these teams in the middle another. Now, don't get me wrong. They're not in a lot of respects because I think they have much more on their side. They've got a lot more established for them, but there's not a lot of divide with a lot of these teams. So there's chaos in this conference. We get that, and you're seeing this in the betting odds as well. A lot of people are seeing that as well. So looking at that, after those 6 teams, there's a lot more jumbled mess. The next 3 teams, Arizona State, Baylor, and TCU, are at 6.5. I did this alphabetical, so it's not like one is over another. It's just more alphabetical based on how many wins there. So it's not like TCU is expected to finish there. Arizona State's expected to finish 7th, whatever that is. This is more just kind of what Vegas is seeing there. So you got those 3 teams at 6.5. Cincinnati, Iowa State, Kansas, Oklahoma State, UCF, and West Virginia all at 5.5 games. Now, some of these are unlike the other, right? Like Iowa State, I don't think they have a lot more to deal with. That 5.5 is going to be much harder for them as opposed to, let's say, potentially an Oklahoma State. I think there's a lot of people that believe that Oklahoma State's going to be the darling of the Big 12, where they're going to be the quote unquote Indiana of the Big 12. Now, whether that's, realized or not remains to be seen, but it's one of those teams that I think there's going to be a lot of interest in, and a lot of people that believe that based off of what Oklahoma State brought in, a new head coach and basically the entire North Texas team, and the quarterback, Drew Mestamaker, is a phenomenal quarterback, and we'll see if he can do that at the P4 level. There's a lot more upside there. So them being at 5.5, the same with Iowa State, maybe not that similar. Now, granted, Oklahoma State hasn't won a conference game in 2 years. So this is still a huge move for this Oklahoma State team, right? Like they can be predicted to be really good, but I wouldn't expect them to have this seismic change where suddenly they go from last to in contention with the Big 12 title. Now, it's possible. We saw this with Arizona State a couple years ago, right? Even then, it's still going to be a gradual build. We'll see what happens. It's going to be interesting. So really fascinated there. Maybe you find some value in some of those teams if you're interested in that kind of stuff. But for the most part, I think these are all pretty accurately depicted. A lot of these could go over. Some of them obviously have to go under. You can't have every one of these teams go do everything here. But I think there's realistic probabilities here, and I think Vegas got most of this relatively right. Oklahoma State's probably one that could go higher. Kansas maybe could go higher. Some of these other teams. And then lastly, you have Colorado at 4.5 games. Now, this is quite the situation, right? You bring in Deion Sanders, and I think he's a great guy. I think he's a great coach. I think there's a lot more behind the scenes that make this a challenge for Deion and Colorado. And you go and spend all this money, you get all this hype, you have all this entertainment and value and content, and you're still the cellar dweller of a conference. And it's unfortunate, right? Without Shadir Sanders or Travis Hunter, Colorado's just still kind of been a mess. It's not that they don't have talent. They keep bringing in talent, but there's not a lot of sustainability there. There's a lot of turnover. There's a lot of moving parts, and it just doesn't. There's no staying power, right? Really fascinated to see what happens with Colorado, but I just don't expect there to be a lot of movement on the upward, right? The quarterback situation is still going to be interesting. Beyond that, offensive line play, defense, can they be good enough? They're just a few steps behind a lot of these programs. Now, do I think they're going to finish last? Maybe not. I think my bet, if I were a betting man, I would probably put Iowa State as last, just because I think they have so much turnover. There's so much going on that's the case, but Colorado's going to be there. So tough situation, but those are your Big 12 betting odds. Obviously, locally, BYU and Utah at the top is a great opportunity. That BYU-Utah game is going to be another big game for both of these programs. Assuming that both of these teams live up to their expectations this year, that game is going to be very pivotal, especially since Texas Tech isn't on that schedule for either one of these teams to be able to potentially get into that Big 12 title game. The winner of that BYU-Utah game very well could get into the title game based off of that game alone, right? That's how close this is going to be. Now, I don't know that it's going to be that close like it was last year in terms of that game being the decider. I think there's a little bit more up for debate, but at the same time, the way that this conference is shaped out, I wouldn't at all be surprised if that game is that case. And that's brings another reason why it's a little frustrating that that game is not at the end of the season. I think there's always going to be competition between these two teams, regardless of whether one is better than the other at the time or if they're on equal planes. And the fact that we get it in early November is kind of a shame. That's the way it is. It's the nature of this. Unfortunately, it's not going to be the last game. And so a big, potential Big 12 conference game decider, title game decider is going to be potentially decided early in November. So it is what it is, but cool opportunity for both of these teams. Again, follow up what they did last year, the successes that they both had, the opportunities that they have to be able to battle it out on the field as rivals, but at the same time, kind of carry the torch for the Big 12. Now, they have to sustain this, right? They have to continue to do it. But the fact that you have both of these programs who, found varying degrees of wandering to be able to get here, they're now back together in a conference once again at the top of a conference. Whether it was the Mountain West, the WAC, whatever it may be, now you have an opportunity to do that together again in the Big 12. And you can hate each other, you can love each other, whatever you want to do. You can support each other. I don't think there's going to be a lot of support amongst each other, but the fact that you have two Utah teams, that's good for this economy. It's good for the opportunities here in the state of Utah for football. And so regardless of what happens on the field, having both of these teams at the top, or at least projected at the top and considered some of the best teams, is a good opportunity for the state of Utah. So cool opportunity. We'll see what happens. Like I said, none of this plays out perfectly, but it's going to be interesting to see how it goes. So with that, we're gonna silence the betting odds stuff. We're gonna move on to our next thing. We're going to move to the schedule preview. So what's going to take place is over the next 6-ish weeks, we're going to split up the schedule into 2 teams a week. We're going to break these teams down. We'll do our best to try to give you the understanding of what's taking place with these teams, where they're at, going into fall camp and all that stuff. And the way that it's going to work out is we've got this all going down to Big 12 Media Days, where you'll know a lot about these teams. We'll get into Big 12 Media Days, get to talk to the players, the coaches, and all that, and then we're really kind of essentially in the unofficial start of fall. Now, there's a few weeks in between there, and we'll have some other stuff to do, but for the most part, that'll ramp us up to that. So you can look forward to it that way. This can be a little preview you can go back to. This week, I'm going to combine them. So this week, we've got Idaho and Arkansas. I'm combining them because the FCS, I'm not honestly going to spend a lot of time there. And for reasons. So we'll mostly do Arkansas today. And then starting next week, my plan, assuming that my schedule works out and everything works, my kids in school this week. And so assuming that they're not terrorist teenagers, ship them out the door. We will try to do 1 episode per team. So we'll release 2 episodes next week, but having them broken up into 1 episode per team. So that way you can just listen to one team and get it in a little bit more sizable bites. But we'll see how my schedule goes. So don't be surprised if next week there's just 1 episode with 2 teams covered. I'm going to do my best to try to get that way, but we'll see. So the week of May 24th, we'll go talk about Utah State and Iowa State. May 31st, that week, we'll talk about Kansas and Colorado. The week of June 7th, Houston, Cincinnati. June 14th will be the week of BYU and Arizona. And then lastly will be the week of June 21st, where we talk about TCU and West Virginia. So that's just following Utah's schedule. We'll break it down that way. We'll know what's going on. And then that'll lead into the week of June 28th, where we'll do a preview of Big 12 Media Days, kind of recap everything and give a look at the rest of the league. Maybe touch on some of these other teams that aren't on the schedule, but maybe give you some highlights to what's going on there. And then, like I said, we'll do Big 12 Media Days and jump into that. So looking forward to this. These are always some of my favorite. They're a lot of fun. It gives me an opportunity to really understand these teams a little bit better, and I hope that I can convey some of that to you. I'm not perfect with these. These aren't going to be all-inclusive. There's a lot to learn about every team, and there's a lot of nuances to every team. So it's not always easy, but I do my best to do my research and try to find this out, and I'm going to miss something, right? But I hope that I can give you a little glimmer of what that is. You can go listen to my colleague as well, Steve Bartle, who is doing some interviews with beat writers from each of these schools. He'll divide and conquer that way, where he's going to talk to the beat writers. I'm going to break it down this way, and we'll kind of give you a holistic view of what is going on with these teams and try to give you as much of an understanding of these teams as we break this down in the offseason. So we'll jump into that. All right, let's switch to our first game. Game 1. We get FCS opponent Idaho. Now, in the back of my head, I was thinking, okay, Utah's played Idaho recently, but it was really more Idaho State. Idaho, they haven't played a ton, honestly. I mean, they used to back in the day, but Idaho, the last time that they played them was in 1993, and Utah lost. Not a good look for Utah back then, but they lost 28-17. So we'll call this the revenge game. It's the Thursday night game, the coveted one that Utah always seems to get, that Thursday night game. The time for this game is not set, but it's a Thursday night, so I assume it's going to be 5:30, 7 o'clock. I don't know. You can kind of guess what that's going to be, but this is going to be your home opener, your season opener. Get an opportunity to kind of fill things out. And the beauty about this schedule, looking at this schedule, is assuming that everything that comes to reality that is on paper happens. Utah has a fairly easy-ish schedule at the beginning. It allows them to ramp up and kind of have some good competition, but at the same time, ramp up, especially for that offensive line that's going to need it, and maybe some of these pieces that are going to come together. This allows them to kind of ramp up a little bit more than maybe in years past, right? Like, you're not immediately starting with Florida, for example. You now get an opportunity for an FCS game, get those kinks out, get the jitters out, whatever may have you, and then you jump into that and move forward. And then the back half of that schedule is going to be much tougher. And if things have gone well in that first half, that sets itself up really well for that back half. But if you're still kind of spiraling and not getting into a good set in that first half, that back half is going to be a bit rough. So it's set up well for Utah, but at the same time, you still have to go out there and win the games each week. So you start with Idaho FCS program. Last season, you can see this if you're watching on YouTube. They were 4-8 last year, 2-6 in Big Sky. Just not really a competitive team in the FCS. When you look at a lot of their stats, I mean, they ranked mid to bottom in a lot of these categories within the FCS. So this isn't one of the more talented FCS teams coming in and trying to make an example of Utah. With that said, that's not to say that this is a team that couldn't, come out there and do some damage. But at the same time, this is an FCS opponent. There shouldn't be a lot of intrigue here. This is more of the tune-up game for Utah to be able to understand what they have, right? And as it goes for an offensive line, this becomes a very pivotal game. Probably more so than many season openers, just simply because of what this offensive line needs to do. We've talked about this many times, that how the offensive line goes will determine a lot of what will take place for this season. Now, there's other factors, other components, but that offensive line, there's a lot of weight put on those shoulders to be able to carry this team. And so, it's going to be interesting, and I think this is going to be a good test. Does Utah start out slow? Is this one of those frustrating games where you come out and the score is 10-0 at halftime, and you're wondering if Utah is going to be any good this year? Or is this a game where Utah comes out firing and Idaho's defense, which is suboptimal, just can't even keep up, and Utah's put 42 points on the board by halftime? Like, there's a lot of varying degrees here, and I also don't know that you're going to learn a lot from that, right? The things that I'm looking for here, mostly from this game for Utah specifically, is that offensive line. You want to see the passing attack. You want to see how Utah's going to attack that. But at the same time, you're not going to give away the secret sauce that game, right? You're going to keep things pretty vanilla, pretty basic. Try to do some things that get people excited, get things, the wrinkles out. But at the same time, that's going to be a pretty vanilla, basic game. And you're just hoping to be able to get some consistency and kind of get those engines started for the team. So, don't expect fireworks, but at the same time, if there are fireworks, great. All right. So with this, just a quick look at last year. The defense really just couldn't keep up. The defense struggled in a lot of facets. The offense was okay. It wasn't great, but at the same time, within the FCS, they were just mediocre. But the defense really kind of put them in a pinch. And so if they can get that defense figured out, there could be some upswing. Now, they have a good quarterback and a do-it-all playmaker in Joshua Wood. This is a guy that passed for 1,900 yards, 14 touchdowns, 5 interceptions at 58%. So he's not completely accurate. he could be a little bit better. He comes into this season as a redshirt junior, so he's got some experience on his side, but he's also a dual threat guy. He rushed for 589 yards, 7 touchdowns as their leading rusher last year. So Idaho and a lot of what they're doing is on this Joshua Wood, excuse me. They're putting a lot on his shoulders. If Utah can, put him in a box or limit what he does, I think Utah has a fairly easy chance. Now, look, this is an FCS opponent. They should have an easy chance anyway. But what I'm saying here is if you can get him, you should have a pretty solid chance. They have some guys at running back that they feel really excited about, guys that DeMonte Bias, he's coming from El Camino College. He rushed last year for 835 yards, but that's, you're coming from the JC. Can you do that at the FCS level? You're doing that now against a defensive front like Utah that's going to be much different than he's ever faced before. That's going to be the biggest difference. So, there's going to be some questions here. Idaho does change its offensive coordinator. They let go of Matt Linehan last year, bring in a new coordinator in Ian Shoemaker, has done really well in his respective role. He's coming in from Grand Valley State, which is a Division II program, and he's done very well at the D2 level. But now, once again, you're jumping up to the D1 level, and your first game is against Utah, which is known for a stout defense and a defense that's going to want to prove itself, especially after last year's struggles late in the season in the run game. So, this is going to be really interesting to be able to look at how this goes. Take this game for what it's worth. It's an opportunity for you to get back in Rice-Eccles Stadium. It's an opportunity for you to be able to have some fun. You can also kind of have a little bit more to look at in terms of what the season can bring. So, I know a lot of people who watch football, they follow the ball, right? You just follow the ball, you see what's happening. This may be the game where you just watch that offensive line. You watch how they gel, you watch how they move their feet, how they work together in tandem. This may be that game where you're not so stuck on watching the ball. You're stuck on watching a position or certain things that way. That's kind of where my eye is going to go this game. I want to see how that offensive line gels. I also want to see on the opposite side, that defense. Can they do what they need to? Now, look, I don't think we're going to get a lot. We're not going to learn a lot necessarily from this defense based off of this. But at the same time, if suddenly Utah is being gashed by the run game in this game, maybe there's some things you need to work on, right? Well, definitely you need to work on. So I don't want to say that Idaho's, not going to be competitive in this game. I just think Utah's now at a completely different level. This is a good test for Morgan Scalley in his first game. Technically it's the second game because he did coach as the head coach in the Las Vegas Bowl. But you've got a different look here. We'll see what happens. He's now the guy in charge, and we'll take everything that way. So interesting look. I don't know that there's much more to be said about Idaho, but good rebound game after that 1993 game. What is that? 33 years? Is that what it is? Yeah, 33 years since they last met. So a lot has changed since then. Utah's been in many, many different conferences since then. So we're here there. All right, let's jump to game 2. And this is the one that I think has most people intrigued. And that is the it's not Arizona, sorry. Arkansas Razorbacks are coming into Salt Lake City as an SEC opponent. This was one of those SEC opponents that Mark Harlan scheduled. You had Florida, you have LSU, you have Arkansas, obviously. You've got a lot of these home games that, assuming that everything stays intact, and so far nobody has canceled these series, these are good opportunities for Utah to bring in SEC teams into the into their house, which quite honestly hasn't happened a ton over the years. And so, good opportunity for Utah to be able to showcase themselves against, what many consider one of the premier leagues or conferences, excuse me, in the country. Obviously, the P2 with the Big Ten and the SEC, they run this league. So the more you can kind of showcase yourself against these teams, the better for Utah. Obviously, they split the games against Florida a couple years ago, get the opportunity to go against Arkansas. And Arkansas, look, they're not going to be the Alabamas or the Georgias or those teams at the top of the SEC. But a win over an SEC opponent would be good. And like I said, earlier in this is still a quality opponent. Their schedule, if you're looking at this right now, their schedule their record, last year wasn't great. They were 2-10. 0-8 in the SEC wasn't great, right? They fired their head coach. Sam Pittman's fired midseason. They replaced it with Bobby Petrino, which is another fun story arc all in and of its own. Anybody that's followed the Bobby Petrino saga over the last decade plus, you're in for a whirlwind there. If not, go Google it, and it's a lot of fun. He's not their head coach. He was just the interim one. Ryan Silverfield was hired as the head coach, formerly at Memphis. Very successful coach. He's one of those G5 coaches coming up that I think is going to be really solid. But he's coming into an Arkansas program that just hasn't had a lot of sustained success. They've been solid, but not to the level where they're going to compete consistently in the SEC. Now, obviously, there's a tier in that SEC with Georgia, Alabama, Texas A&M right now, Texas. There's a lot of these teams that are at the top. LSU, Ole Miss last year. There's a lot of these teams, and Arkansas is just not simply there. So this game will be played on Saturday, September 12th. We don't know the time yet. Those should be released here soon. I'll update you once we get those, but that's going to be a showcase game for the state of Utah in the sense that an SEC team is coming to the state. My understanding, though, is that week is pretty stacked with teams, so I think Utah is going to have this game somewhat buried, especially since Arkansas is not expected to be great. They are the cellar dwellers of the SEC this year. They're expected to be 4.5 wins this season from Bovada. So, this is a team like Colorado in the Big 12. Now, are they the same? No, I think Arkansas is a much better, more established program in terms of what they've got coming back and what they've got. But this is kind of the equivalent of that, where you're playing a team from the bottom. Now, the bottom of the SEC is probably better than a lot of most, but Arkansas, there's going to be a lot of questions there. So, they open up the season with an FCS opponent, so you're not going to learn a lot from them as well. There's a lot more questions about this team going into the season, not being even that Ryan Silverfield is a new head coach, right, of this program. Now, you got 2 first-year head coaches coming into this. Silverfield's had experience at lower levels, whereas Morgan Scalley's never been a head coach. But it's going to be a tough challenge, and so you're going to see maybe some things that are a little bit janky and a little bit of a struggle on both teams. But like I said, I think Utah is more well put together in terms of what they've got. But this could absolutely be a game Utah loses. So looking at this, that schedule, like I said, is a little bit deceiving. So the season, they started out 2-0 last year, and then they went on to lose 10 straight. Now, but in those 10 games, 5 of those games were by single scores. So they were close. They were competitive. They were able to do what they needed to. They just weren't able to finish. And most of that came down to their defense, similar to what we were talking about with Idaho. Arkansas could put up some points, and they put up, let's see, I'll put this up real quick. Excuse me. This is a bit tiny, but this is a 5-year look at what they did. Sorry, you'll probably have to zoom in on that one. I need to make that bigger for you. Let me get it for myself. Sorry. So last year they were able to put up 32.9 points per game, but their defense allowed 33.8. So you're already at disadvantage in every single game because you're averaging almost 34 points a game. Like, that's crazy. Now, I get it. Some of these teams are SEC. A lot of these teams are in SEC because that's their conference, and you're going to get a lot of points scored. But to allow 34 points, I mean, you're just a sieve back there, right? Like, you're just allowing anything to happen. So really tough situation, but they had some good things. They were in the top 30 in every offensive category. Rushing, they averaged 191 yards, which was 28th in the conference in the league. What am I trying to say? FBS. 30th in passing with 262 yards a game. They finished the season not ranked. My heavens, I'm really struggling. They finished the season 13th in FBS in total offense. So their offense could score. They could put up points. They could move the ball. They could do what they needed to. But at the same time, that defense was not great. So I mentioned the scoring. 33.8 points was 129th in the country. Rushing, they're pretty close to Utah actually last year in their run defense. So that's where they were mostly gashed. They ranked 116th. Utah ranked 110th for reference point. They gave up 186 yards per game. Not great. But you pair that with their passing defense, which was 104th. They gave up 239 yards in the air. Utah was 17th in the country in their passing defense. So they at least made up for a lot of it in their passing, the coverage defense, all that kind of stuff. They ranked, I got to stop saying ranked. They didn't rank. They finished 122nd in total defense. So just not a great look for this team. They really struggled. They just couldn't get it done. Offensively, they were able to do it for the most part. They just weren't able to get it done on that side of the ball. So, like I said, 5 games by single digits. They lost to Ole Miss 41-35. Ole Miss, obviously a playoff team, did very well. Really solid team last year with Lane Kiffin. They lost by 3 to Tennessee, 34-31. Another solid team. They lost by 3 also to Texas A&M, which was another playoff team. Really solid team as well. And then 2 other teams that they lost to: Mississippi State 38-35, another 3-score game. And lastly, LSU, they lose by 1 point, 23-22. So this is a team that has the bones, right? Like they're there. I think that's why they're good enough to be competitive, and that's why Utah can't be caught, sleeping here. They've got to be able to be ready for this and not look at schedules. And Morgan Scalley's not, right? Like he's not looking at the schedule and saying, "Oh, Arkansas was 2-10 last year. Let's just mail it in. We're gonna go trounce this team." Like, no, nobody's doing that. But at the same time, their schedule and their look was a little bit deceiving based on how the season went on. So they're a really solid team. Are they going to compete for an SEC championship? No. But at the same time, this is a team that can do some damage. Now, last year, they also had Notre Dame and Memphis on the schedule. Notre Dame, obviously a solid program. Memphis, who they took their head coach. Memphis beat them. How about that? Memphis beats you, and then Arkansas goes and takes the head coach. It happens, right? But I think this is a good opportunity for Utah. This is the first ever meeting between these two programs. They've never played. I don't know that matters really because Utah hasn't played many SEC programs over the years, but good opportunity for Utah to be able to play a quality opponent that is still on the downside, right? At least right now. As I've mentioned, Ryan Silverfield is a great coach that has done a lot of good at Memphis, a winning coach wherever he goes, but now it's taking it to that next level. And unfortunately for him, he joins a conference that is incredibly tough, right? This isn't going to be an easy look. And your first game is against a Utah team that is known for a quality defense. Yes, they have some changes. And so there's things there that you can be optimistic about. But at the same time, there's a lot more pieces for this team to replace than Utah does, right? So looking at this, they lose starting quarterback Taylon Green and their leading rusher Mike Washington Jr. Both of these combined for 1,800 rushing yards last season and 16 touchdowns. So that's a lot of production to lose. You just don't, rebuild that quickly and have that kind of production. That's not to say that they don't have people in their respective rooms that can do it, but you just don't make up 1,800 rushing yards or that kind of production overnight. Even with an infusion of talent in what you're able to do, it just doesn't happen. I mentioned that they had a coaching change. Ryan Silverfield comes in from Memphis. He had a 50-25 record there in his couple years that he was, a few years that he was there. But by and large was a really successful coach in what he did. He brings with him his offensive coordinator in Tim Cramsey. So he's been with Silverfield at Memphis for the last 4 years. They have a good connection. They've got some good camaraderie. They brought a few players, and we'll get into this here shortly, over from Memphis. And so there's some consistency, right? It's not the same as Oklahoma State bringing kind of the whole North Texas team, basically. This is just a few players, few contributing players that are going to be able to do it over from Memphis. So good opportunities here. What Tim Cramsey does is the way that he describes it is he matches his offense to the players. Now, I think you're getting more and more of that from an offensive coordinator in this day and age, right? There's not a lot of these coordinators that are just saying, here's my scheme, you run it, right? Andy Ludwig was kind of more that way, right? Like, this is my scheme. We recruit to it, but we fit to it, and you fall into my scheme. And he can be, he can do a lot with that and find skill sets within these players to make it work. But a lot of these offensive coordinators nowadays are much more trying to tailor their offense to the players that they have, the skill sets that they have. So when I say that, it's not so it's more commonplace than it is rare at this point. But it's still something to note because it is important, right? He is a spread style. He has a spread style scheme, and he follows more of the Chip Kelly type version of that. There's a lot of different spreads, right? And he follows more of the Chip Kelly, meaning he wants tempo. He wants to be able to move fast. He wants to be able to confuse you and do things in a quick manner to be able to make it so that you have to be ready as a defense, right? And as this being the first game, the first true game, excuse me, sorry, my mouth is dry. 1 second. I got like something in my throat that wouldn't go away, so I couldn't get it. So with this being the first true game for Colton Swan to call as a defensive coordinator, yes, he gets the Idaho game, but I don't think there's going to be any worries there. But this becomes the true test of what you can do. When you face a team like this and what Cramsey's able to do, Colton Swan's going to have to be on his game, right? This is where he's going to earn his living right now, because if you can get this and help that defense in a way when things are going fast and things are sped up more than normal, you have a much better chance to be successful if you can do it right. This is where that defense has to have great communication. They have to have those signals brought in quickly. They have to know what's going on. This is where Scalley's side of it, where he wants to be more situational in terms of the situational awareness. He wants to be able to have the players understand what's happening on the field before they even look to the sidelines and look for a play. He wants them to say, okay, this is 2nd and 7. This is the types of looks that we've seen from Arkansas or Cramsey or anything. They've done their homework so that it makes it easier for them to be able to understand that and have that communication, understand what they need to do. This is where we're going to learn a lot of what they're able to do as a defense here. This could be a world of hurt where Arkansas just is if especially if they're working together in tandem well, this could be dangerous for Utah, right? Especially if they're out of sync, you're kind of caught sleeping. I don't think it's a caught sleeping situation, more so of more just like you're not ready for the moment. And so there's a lot of struggles that could be present here in this situation. So with this spread, you're going to see a lot of tempo. You're going to see a lot of movement. There's going to be a lot of zone read plays. So you're going to see a lot of outside zone, for example. You're going to try to do a lot of things to get the offensive line to be much more agile and be more aggressive and trying to do things to be able to put Utah's defensive line in tough situations. There's also going to be a lot of quick passes. So once again, you're looking for that speed, right? You're not necessarily looking for a route to, develop down the field 20 yards. You're looking for this to be able to get maybe intermediate routes, 5 to 10 yards, where you're just trying to move and then trying to create space and trying to be able to do different things that way. So this is how Cramsey kind of operates. He's going to try to do different things that way, where he's going to speed you up. And if Utah is on, they're going to be okay. I think they're going to be okay because of the way that they're able to do things. They've got the personnel to be able to match that, right? It helps that last year Utah tried to be a little bit quicker with its tempo. I don't think Utah last year's tempo was going to still match what Arkansas is expected to run. But at the same time, you have some experience there. Granted, you've got some new players, and you've got to do certain things that help. But these guys are going to have to be very dialed in. The one benefit here is, assuming that spring translates to fall, is Utah has been very good, especially in their passing defense up close, right? A lot of those DBs were really good in those short to intermediate range of being able to just understand their assignment and do what they need to. If that works, then Utah's going to be in a good situation. It's still a lot to play, right? There's still a lot to do. But I think if that communication and things are going well works for Utah, then I think they can counter this pretty well. I mean, the spread is one of those where at the time when Chip Kelly was running it, it was a bit revolutionary in terms of how he operated. And so he caught a lot of people off guard, right? A lot of people have seen this over the years, right? Many teams run this. A lot of teams try to go up tempo, try to do things quickly. So it's not as much of a novelty as it is more of a regular thing. But at the same time, for a first-year defensive coordinator coming in, trying to test against this offensive scheme, it's going to be tough. And this is, like I said, where Colton Swan is going to make his money. He is a brilliant mind. He's been our defensive coordinator before. He's seen these things many, many times. He's in charge of a position group that is very important in coverage and the communications. He understands what needs to take place for this type of stuff. But there's one thing calling it for as a position, and another being able to do it for the entire defense and making sure you get those plays in right, all that kind of stuff. So we'll see what happens there. They also bring in a new defensive coordinator in Ron Roberts. He was the defensive coordinator at Florida for the last 2 seasons. This was after Utah beat Florida, so you didn't get to see his defense there. But for the most part, a pretty solid defense at Florida. Florida was kind of a mess. They obviously went through a coaching change, but they still had potential, right? They still had talent. They were still able to do a lot. Were literally average in most defensive metrics. Now, part of that could be the team. Part of that could just be Ron Roberts' schemes. It really, it's tough to fully say because Florida was just kind of in a mess before the season even began. There's a lot of pressure on that program, and I think that pressure feeds down to players. It's tough. So not easy, but what Ron Roberts likes to do, his defensive scheme, he likes to have a lot of simulated pressures, which means he'll have a lot of that defensive line drop back into coverage. He'll have other guys as they drop into coverage come in and blitz, different things to be able to keep you on your toes to make you feel like, okay, I know what's happening. Oh, it's cover 2, it's cover 4. And then suddenly he flips it, right? There's a lot of that kind of stuff. He likes to run a multiple defense, try to mix and match, go from zone to man in the same play, different things there. What this defense needs, though, is a ton of communication. And if they're able to have that communication and they can do their switches well and they can read off each other well, it can be a really potent defense. They can do a lot of damage because now you've put the quarterback in a situation where he has to be on his money or else he's not going to know what's going on. He also likes to run 2 high safeties, and so in that case, any passing attack is going to need to be accurate and on time, or else there's high potential for, an interception or a turnover or a pass breakup. There's a lot of things that way. So this is going to be another test for the offense where, you can't just go out there and expect to just toss the ball around and expect it to work. There's going to be a lot of thinking on Devin Dampier's part. There's going to be a lot of thinking from this offensive line. This is one of those games where this offensive line is going to be tested a ton. You're going to go in there. The offensive line is not going to be perfect. This is where Utah has to figure out how they can move forward. Is this the game where this offensive line crumbles and they just say, look, we're out. We can't do this. I don't get that sense from this line, right? But this is the game where if you're going to get tested, this is it. Not because it's the SEC talent, like obviously there's that. But this is more just the way that this is done, especially with those simulated pressures. This becomes a challenge because you may think you're blocking a guy and then suddenly he drops into coverage. And now where do you go? Right? There's a lot of that. Now, this team understands that. They understand how it works. But this is where you're going to see this offensive line gel. If they can gel well against this Arkansas defense and they can manage it up well, I think you're going to see a really solid offensive line this year. One game, don't get me wrong, it's one game. But I think this is a perfect game in many respects to test the defense, to test the offense, to be able to help you in the key areas where Utah has potentially struggled. Well, not potentially has struggled or could potentially struggle this year. And so whatever this game presents itself, I think this is a perfect litmus test for Utah in a lot of facets of the game, right? Defense, offense, the way these coordinators are built is lined up very well with what Utah needs. And so I think this serves as a great transition for Utah to be able to move forward to the rest of the year. You got to stay healthy. You got to be able to communicate. You've got to make sure that you're on. You got to make sure that you're able to do everything that your coaches have been preaching about situational awareness and everything else there. If you can do that, this game is for the taking for Utah. I truly believe that Utah can win this game, but there's a lot at play where this isn't going to be easy. Now, jumping over from those schemes and everything else, let's look at some of the players here. It's a big turnover. So this isn't one where they've got a lot of consistency and holdover. That's not to say that they don't have guys that stayed, but a majority of their team last year was either veteran players or they've entered the transfer portal. And a lot of the contributors were veteran players who graduated. So there's a lot to replace. As much as Utah has to replace the whole offensive line and all these other stuff, Arkansas has to replace so much more on both sides of the ball. And trying to hit on all these transfers is not going to be easy. So we'll see. Outgoing transfers, Arkansas had 41 players enter the transfer portal. And not all of these are solid players, right? A lot of these are depth players. Speaking to that offensive line, the way that this offensive scheme is with, what is his name? Ramsey. Mixing Ryan Silverfield and yeah, you get him. he wants to be able to have more agile offensive line. So a lot of those offensive linemen entered that wouldn't have fit that scheme. So you see a lot of those. They were more depth guys anyway. A majority of the players, especially defensively, didn't get a ton of time. They were in for a few snaps or reps. Like I said, depth players. There's a couple guys that had significant reps. You had a right tackle in Marion Harris. Right tackle, he transfers to Oklahoma. He had 678 snaps in 11 games. That's a lot of experience that you're losing. That doesn't help you. And then on the defensive side, on your defensive line, you have a lineman, Ian Gefford. I botched that, I'm sure. He transfers to Texas. He had 462 snaps over 12 games. He had some of the higher grades in PFF. Really solid player, but he leaves. And then defensive end Justice Boone goes to Wisconsin. He had lower PFF grades, but produced. Sorry, my glasses are messing me up. Produced fairly well. And so you lose some of the guys like that, but for the most part, you didn't really lose a lot of quality pieces that were going to be impactful in your season, right? They could be. They're depth pieces. You move forward with them and everything, but at the same time, the majority of your players that were contributing or starting players in the two deep, they graduated. So this was a veteran unit, especially on the defensive side, especially in the wide receiver room. Your star running back was a veteran or a senior. Your quarterback was a senior. Like this was a team that should have had so much more success just based off of its veteran leadership, and they just didn't live it up. And that's partially why you saw firing at head coach. So with that, they bring in 42 players through the transfer portal. Recruiting class, they brought in 25. They ranked 47th. Good, but not great. Especially as an SEC program, they just didn't really have a lot of quality players in terms of like the overall depth there that they brought in. But in the transfer portal, they were big on offensive linemen. They brought in 7 offensive linemen. They brought in 7 corners, and they brought in 6 linebackers. Some other players, they brought 4 of each of these positions: defensive linemen, safeties, and receivers. So you rebuilt a lot of position groups, right? For the players that I'll highlight here that are, and this is going to be more offensively, that I'll highlight here is AJ Hill, quarterback from Memphis. He was their backup last year, so he wasn't the starter at Memphis, but he got in some, threw for 223 yards, a touchdown, an interception, and threw at 59% over 2 games. So you're really not getting anything there from him of what he could do, but you do bring him in. He understands that system that Memphis ran, so maybe that has a slight nod to give him the advantage. I still don't think he's going to be the starter, but there's potential there. Sutton Smith comes in as the running back. He was Memphis's running back. He was their leading rusher. He had 669 yards, 7 touchdowns, averaged 6.6 yards per carry. I have to imagine that he's going to be in the mix to be the guy. There is another guy here I'll talk about in a second that was on Arkansas. We'll see how these two kind of manage, but either way, you've got 2 guys that are going to be solid, one from the transfer portal, one that stays. We'll get to that. And then lastly, you got 2 wide receivers that transfer, one from Memphis, so another Memphis addition, Jamari Hawkins. He was their second leading receiver with 623 yards and 2 touchdowns, average 16.4 yards per catch. And then Chris Marshall from Boise State. He was also their second leading receiver with 574 yards. So, you're bringing in some talent. You're bringing in some guys that have produced, especially in that wide receiver room and the running back room. And so there's opportunities there. So let's look real quick at kind of how this team is made up. I'm just going to stick mostly to the offense. The defense, there's a lot to be known, but there's so much turnover there that I don't think it's time to really get into that. And honestly, most people pay attention to the offense. So I'm going to stick, especially on this, for Arkansas, for the offensive side today. So with them, their quarterbacks, they have 2 quarterbacks that they're trying to decide. So with Taylon Green gone, they have no incumbent starter. They've got somebody that they're coming in that's fresh. You've got KJ Jackson, who comes in as a sophomore, he was on the roster last year. So he knows what Arkansas has done. Threw for 441 yards, 3 touchdowns, 61% completion percentage over 5 games. He rushed a little, nothing to really speak about over 11 carries, so nothing there. And then, as I mentioned, you bring in redshirt freshman AJ Hill. So the real question here is, who is going to kind of win that job? KJ Jackson, from all reports from spring, was a little bit better mechanically and maybe in decision making. So there's a real potential for him to kind of get that nod. But AJ Hill understands the system, at least had a year under that system already at Memphis. And if he can have a solid offseason and kind of get into fall progressing, maybe they're on more of an equal plane now that he's kind of more acclimated to the team. Either way, both of these are young players. You're not going to have a veteran quarterback back there who understands every nuance of the game. Neither one of these guys have been a starter. They've had playing minutes, but nothing to the extent that is going to, I wouldn't say necessarily scare Utah, but nothing that is going to be a huge mark for these guys that Utah has to worry about. Now, both of these guys are talented. Let me mention that. But at the same time, you're not getting in a veteran quarterback that understands a lot. And so if this defense, Utah's defense, is able to kind of do their own to make this life a challenge for these quarterbacks, this could be apparent really quickly, right? So we'll see what happens. They could be a star. They could just be guys that are going to need a lot of time, and especially with a lot of changes, this could be, or especially in an offense that is going to try to run quickly, that can be a challenge. Now, with that said, because they want to get the ball out fast, it's going to be tougher to get back to either one of these quarterbacks. It's tough to create havoc plays. Plus, when you get some quicker passes, that's going to make it much easier for these guys, so that it's not going to make it as much of a challenge for them to see routes develop or whatever have you. So, as much as the youth is there in the quarterback room, the way that the offensive scheme is presented does benefit a lot of that. Going into the running back rooms, you do have a returner in Braylon Russell. He's a junior. He rushed for 286 yards, 5 touchdowns on 55 carries last year, but was behind Mike Washington Jr. You weren't going to get a ton of touches in relation to that because he just wasn't able to produce as much. But that's not to say that he's not a solid tailback. This is a guy that can do a lot of damage, and there's a lot of optimism that he can be the leading back in that room. But you bring in Sutton Smith, who has already produced. He did it at Memphis and did it really well as their leading rusher. But how do these two players complement each other? Are they able to work, with each other? Is it, what's it going to look like? Either way, you've got two really solid tailbacks that are going to be efficient for this team and are going to help what these young quarterbacks are going to need, right? Especially if they can find some opportunities to pick up some gains in the run game. This is a good opportunity for Arkansas to kind of establish that. Then you can kind of relax things a little bit with the passing, do what you need to. If Utah's defense is struggling in the run game again, tackling is poor, these two could be a real game changer for what Arkansas wants to do. Wide receivers, they lose their top 3 receivers, that veteran unit that I was talking about. All 3 of them combined for 1,900 receiving yards. That's a lot of production. So you do lose a lot of production in the receiving room, but you do bring back your 4th leading receiver in CJ Brown. He's a junior. He had 319 yards, 3 touchdowns on 28 receptions. So you do have some experience there, but still needing to kind of ramp that up. And then you return also tight end Jaden Platt. He had 296 yards and 2 touchdowns as the 5th leading receiver. So you get that. You also get the 2 receivers that I talked about that transferred in. Production between them, what is that, 1,100, 1,200 yards between the 2 of them. So there's going to be potential for this receiving unit to be effective. But with everything in play, like I said, the young quarterbacks, that's going to be a challenge to be able to make this work immediately, right? Game 2, how does this Utah defense look? What will this present? How do you relax it? How do they spread out the field? How do they get those quick passes out? That kind of stuff. We'll see. Lastly, we'll finish mostly with this offensive line, and then one player I'll touch on the defense. Offensive line returns 2 starters in center Caden Kittler and Kobe Branham. Both of these players have good amount of reps, both in the 700s. So they've got a lot of experience, right? And your center returning is huge, especially when you're trying to bring in a lot of different players. So I think that helps. But at the same time, he's not a highly graded player in Pro Football Focus. He's pretty average, if not below average in some of these respects. And so it's not that he can't improve, but he just hasn't been great. Same with Kobe Branham. Overall, saw better than Kittler, but still not high grades, but good enough, right? And he's playing, if I remember right, he's right, no, where was he? Right guard, I believe. But you have two players that are going to help cement that. And then coming in as transfers, you've got Bryant Williams from Louisiana. He'll play right tackle, 719 snaps at Louisiana, considered a 4-star in the portal. One of the higher grades from the players of the offensive linemen transferring in, should be able to cement right tackle well. And then Malachi Breland out of Memphis. So another Memphis player comes in at left guard. He's the highest graded player of the offensive line of last year, 845 snaps, a lot of experience there. But the reality here is a lot of these guys have to gel and come together. So it's the same thing as Utah. They have more experience in terms of players coming in, and obviously two players that are returning starters. But it's all got to come together, and we'll see what happens there. Lastly, defensive end Quincy Rhodes Jr. This is a guy that Utah has to worry about. He's a really solid player. He had 15.5 tackles for loss last year and 8 sacks as the team's leader. Really solid guy that, is a veteran player. He's coming into his senior year. He knows he's been around the block, right? Like he knows what he needs to do. If he can find success, he's a guy that Utah's really going to have to worry about. And I don't know that worry is quite the term, but he's a guy that's going to be at the top of the scouting report for that offense to be able to focus on. Can he be good in coverage, or is he more of that havoc play guy? We'll see what happens with this team, but I think that's another player that's going to really help this Arkansas defense kind of take that next step if they're able to do so. So that's Arkansas. The biggest questions to me is really just replacing a lot of that talent. They've got to reload. They've got a new head coach that's coming in from the group of 5 level. Tough situation. Who takes over at quarterback? That's not going to be an easy situation. They're young. So regardless of who does that, it's going to be a youthful position. And then can the defense make a noticeable change in Silverfield's first year? I don't know. That's a tall task. I don't want to say it can't be worse, but it could be. Last year wasn't great for Arkansas, so it can be better. We'll see what happens. But, this is a team that, as I mentioned, they've got the talent, they've got the ability, they've got the schemes to be able to do this. That makes it hard for Utah. But at the same time, there's so much more that they have to replace that it makes it a challenge. They have to also come to Utah. So we'll see what happens. But either way, really looking forward to this game. I think it's going to be a fun matchup. You get that, SEC opponent in non-conference play. That should be a lot of fun. It's a good test for Utah and what they're able to do. And so it's going to be a good, fun opportunity. But with that, we're going to sign out today. I appreciate you for listening. Come back next week as we go look at 2 other teams and we continue the schedule series. So with that, we'll sign out. Have a great day, and we'll chat with you later.